The girl hit the ground before anyone realized what had happened. Her breath ripped from her lungs as she slid across the gravel near the back entrance of the grocery store. A boot hovered above her, the weight behind it cruel and certain, and for a moment the parking lot fell into that strange, hollow quiet that appears right before violence breaks loose. 3 men circled her, older, heavier, fueled by the reckless arrogance of people who believed their numbers made them untouchable. And several yards away, a little boy stood frozen beside a dented pickup truck, his tiny hand clutching a paper bag he'd insisted on carrying for his father. His voice cracked high and trembling as he stared at the scene unfolding in front of him. "Daddy, please help her." The words barely rose above a whisper, but they cut through the air like a flare. People outside the store glanced, then looked away the way strangers often do when danger brushes too close and asks them to decide who they are. Most chose silence, most chose distance, but the boy's father was not built from such soft material. He stepped forward from behind the truck door, unaware that the bag of groceries had slid from his hand and its contents rolled across the ground. He saw what others didn't, the way the girl's eyes held back panic with the strength of someone who'd learned young that begging rarely worked. Her palms were scraped, her cheek was bruised, but her spirit hadn't cracked. Not yet. The father moved with that unsettling calm only men forged in war carried. His name was Elias Kane, retired Navy SEAL, single parent, and the kind of man who spoke gently until gentleness failed. His son tugged at his sleeve, voice quivering, and Elias placed a steady hand over the small fingers, as if promising he'd return before the boy's fear could bloom into something permanent. Elias stepped between the men and the girl, not with aggression, but with the silent authority of someone who'd stood in places where death waited in the corners. The men didn't recognize the danger, at least not immediately. One smirked. Another spat a cruel accusation at the girl, something about stolen cigarettes, missing cash, a lie so sloppy even guilt didn't bother to hide behind it. The third man only crossed his arms, enjoying the unfolding intimidation like a spectator at a street fight. But Elias heard none of their excuses. He saw the tremble in the girl's shoulders she fought to hide. He saw that she'd done nothing wrong, except perhaps exist in the path of people who mistook vulnerability for permission. It happened quickly after that, not explosively, not with yelling or theatrics, just efficient, clinical precision. Elias asked the girl if she could stand. She nodded, though she couldn't. And when one of the men shoved Elias' shoulder in a pathetic attempt to reclaim dominance, the world snapped back into motion. Elias moved like a shadow folding into itself, a wrist locked, a knee buckled. A throat tightened under the pressure of an open hand, not enough to permanently damage, just enough to remind a body how fragile oxygen could be. The second man swung wildly and caught only air before Elias redirected him into the side of a car, the impact leaving a spiderweb crack in the window. The third man hesitated, realizing too late that retreat would be the only mercy offered today. When the dust settled, all 3 men lay groaning on the pavement, clutching ribs, stomachs, pride none of them brave enough to stand. The girl, still trembling, blinked up at Elias as he helped her to her feet, as gently as if she were his own child. But she wasn't. She was a stranger, and that, somehow, made his son's trembling voice echo even louder in his mind. "Daddy, please help her." What Elias didn't know, what no one in that parking lot knew, was that by intervening in a small town injustice, he had stepped directly into a storm far bigger than 3 violent men. Because by morning, a black government SUV would roll to a stop outside his home, and out of it would step a Navy admiral with news that would unravel everything Elias thought he'd left behind. Night settled over the small town with a heaviness that felt almost intentional, as if the darkness wished to muffle the echoes of what had happened in that parking lot. Elias carried his son to the truck, the boy's arms looped trustingly around his neck, his small heartbeat fluttering like something fragile trying to hide. At home, Elias tucked him into bed, brushed a hand through his hair, and lingered longer than usual. Children sense danger even when adults whisper to protect them from it. His son had watched violence bloom at his feet. No child should carry that weight alone. But while the boy drifted to sleep, Elias couldn't. He sat at the kitchen table, elbows braced against the wood, staring at his own hands the way a man examines maps of old battlefields. He knew what happened today would ripple outward. Violence never ends at the scene. It spreads, echoes, remembers. He had seen those three men before in town, leaning on walls with the lazy arrogance of people who thought consequences were myths. But their eyes had shifted when he took them down, from cruelty to calculation, and he knew what came next for people like them: retaliation, cowardice disguised as courage. Yet it wasn't fear that kept him awake. It was the girl, 17, maybe 18, too thin, too quiet. She'd thanked him after the police arrived, but her voice carried the rehearsed shakiness of someone who'd learned apologies were the currency of survival. A guardian, a parent, someone should have come for her. No one did. He replayed every detail, not because he doubted his actions, but because he wondered who had failed her long before he arrived. Minutes bled into hours. The house remained still, but Elias felt the shift brewing beneath the quiet. He had experienced this sensation overseas, the uneasy calm that settles just before orders arrive, before helicopters carve through darkness, before a mission changes everything. He just didn't expect it to find him here. By dawn, the air felt charged. The early sunlight seeped through the blinds in thin, gold lines, warming the wooden floor, but doing nothing to thaw the tension clutching Elias' chest. He brewed coffee but didn't drink it. His instincts began humming, those old, unshakable instincts the Navy had carved into him. And then he heard it, not a knock, not footsteps, the low hum of an engine outside, a vehicle too heavy, too deliberate, too official to belong on his quiet street. Elias stepped to the window, moving with slow precision. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of his home, the kind used by federal escorts and high-ranking military officers. No logos, no plates that meant anything to civilians. The door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, perfectly pressed uniform, ribbons like a tapestry of wars the public would never know the full truth about. Navy Admiral, Elias' stomach tightened not with fear, but with recognition. Admirals did not make personal visits. Not to retired men, not to single fathers living quietly on the outskirts of town. Something was wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong. He opened the door moments before the Admiral reached it, and the older man paused, studying him with eyes that carried secrets and sorrow. Elias straightened instinctively, the reflex of a soldier saluting ghosts. The Admiral didn't speak immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted to the small pair of shoes by the doorway, then to the pale light flickering from the kitchen, and finally back to Elias, measuring, weighing, deciding how much truth morning could bear. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the clipped formality expected from a man of his rank. It was lower, older, worn. Elias, we need to talk, and it can't wait. The words settled between them like a verdict, heavy enough to shift the air in the home. Elias stepped aside to let him in. He didn't ask why the Admiral was here. The answer would arrive soon enough. It always did. And somewhere down the hall, his son slept peacefully, unaware that the world pressing toward their front door was about to pull his father back into shadows he had fought desperately to leave behind. The Admiral entered the house with the bowed posture of a man carrying a truth that weighed more than his uniform ever could. Elias closed the door behind him, the click echoing through the quiet home like a seal on a chapter that could not be undone. They stood facing each other for a moment, two men shaped by war, by orders that carved scars deeper than blades, by memories that left their edges sharpened long after retirement papers were signed. The Admiral's eyes roamed the room with a careful, almost mournful attention. The framed drawing Elias' son had made, the boots by the heater, the quiet evidence of a life lived simply, intentionally, safely. It was the life every soldier dreamed of, but few managed to hold on to. "Say it," Elias murmured, not with impatience, but with the resigned calm of a man who recognized the arrival of an inevitable storm. The Admiral exhaled through his nose, steady but hollow. "Yesterday, what happened at that grocery store?" His gaze hardened slightly. "Those 3 men you put down weren't just small town thugs." Elias' jaw tightened. He'd suspected as much, though suspicion had remained a quiet shadow at the edge of his thoughts. "Then what were they?" The Admiral hesitated, an unsettling thing to witness in someone who had once commanded fleets. "They were assets in a federal investigation, undercover, embedded in a trafficking ring we've been tracking for over a year." He paused, letting the information sink in. "And the girl you protected, she wasn't the suspect, she was the target." A chill threaded down Elias' spine, cold and methodical. The pieces clicked into place with a sharpness that felt personal. He thought of the fear in the girl's eyes, the hollowed resilience, the hunger, the bruises. The way no guardian had come for her. She was being used. The Admiral continued quietly, forced to cooperate. They were tightening control over her. "You interrupted it." Elias leaned back against the counter, gripping its edge until the muscles in his forearm flexed. He had seen trafficking operations overseas. The manipulation, the coercion, the erasure of identity. He had sworn he would never again stand by and watch someone be preyed upon, but the Admiral wasn't finished. "Last night," he said, lowering his voice even further, "those 3 men called their superior, someone far more dangerous, someone who does not appreciate interference." His gaze met Elias, clear and direct. "They know your face now. They know your home. They know you have a child." The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Elias didn't move, but something inside him shifted, an internal reawakening of the soldier he'd buried beneath fatherhood and routine. It wasn't fear that tightened his chest, it was calculation, strategy, the instinctive preparing of lines and exits and contingencies. "They're coming," Elias said quietly. "Yes." The Admiral's tone darkened. "And they won't make the mistake of confronting you in public this time." A soft sound drifted down the hallway, the light thump of Elias' son shifting in his bed. The Admiral's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for a brief moment, the sternness in his expression cracked into something pained. "You saved that girl," the Admiral murmured. "You did the right thing, morally, humanly, but it put you in their path." He paused. "And I'm here because I can't let them come for you alone." Elias swallowed the rising tension, grounding himself in the weight of the moment. "What do you need from me?" The Admiral's shoulders squared, though his voice carried a softness rarely heard from men built of military steel. "We need your mind, your instinct, your precision." His gaze swept the room once more. "But most of all, we need you because they're not after revenge anymore." He let the final truth fall like a blade. "They want the girl back, and they've marked your son as leverage." Elias didn't flinch, but the temperature in the room seemed to shift around him slowly, dangerously, as though the air recognized the awakening of a storm that had slept too long. The Admiral straightened. "And whatever you choose next, Elias will determine whether this ends in your home or with your home standing behind you." Before Elias could respond, the distant crunch of tires on gravel whispered through the early morning air. Someone was outside, and this time it wasn't the Admiral. The Admiral turned first, his posture sharpening with the reflex of a man who had survived ambushes in places where sunrise offered no safety. Elias didn't need to speak. His eyes met the Admiral's for the briefest moment, and something silent and decisive passed between them, the acknowledgement that whatever was about to unfold could not touch the small sleeping boy down the hallway. The gravel outside shifted with deliberate slowness, as though whoever had arrived wanted their presence to be felt before being seen. Elias moved through the house with the practiced stillness of a predator in dense forest, steps noiseless, heartbeat steady despite the rising threat. He grabbed nothing, no weapon, no phone, because a man like him didn't need items to become dangerous. He carried his training in his bones. He reached the front window and eased the curtain a fraction of an inch. A dark sedan sat idling halfway down the street, its headlights off, its shape almost absorbed into the thinning dawn. Not police, not military, wrong make, wrong stall, wrong energy. Men who operated in quiet needed no lights. The Admiral stepped beside Elias, gaze narrowing. They moved faster than expected. He murmured, "This wasn't supposed to happen yet." Elias didn't respond. He watched, observed, counted shadows within the sedan, two in front, one in the back, shifting with the restless posture of someone rehearsing violence. The back door opened halfway, then paused, as though the figure inside was reconsidering whether this street, this house, this man were worth the risk. They didn't know Elias Kane, and they didn't know what kind of darkness a father could summon when his child was threatened. A moment later the sedan pulled away, rolling slowly down the road like a surveying predator deciding the hunt would be better at night. The message was unmistakable. They weren't here to attack, not yet. They were here to warn, to let Elias know he was being watched. Studied, timed, the Admiral exhaled long and low. "This confirms it. They're probing your perimeter, testing response time. They'll return when they believe you're vulnerable." Elias let the curtain fall back into place. "They're mistaken." The Admiral's gaze shifted toward the hallway. "Your son, he must remain protected at all costs." Elias nodded, but his eyes softened for the briefest moment. He thought of his boy's innocent questions, the way he clung to Elias' hand in crowded places, the way he whispered "Daddy," the same way some people prayed. That child was his anchor, his redemption, his final reason for leaving the shadows of war behind. But now war had found him again. The Admiral placed a small encrypted device on the kitchen table. "This holds everything: the girl's file, the men's connections, the trafficking network's map. We need to extract her safely before they relocate her." His voice carried the weight of a plea he rarely allowed himself to express. "Elias, she has no one, and after what you did, you're the only person she still trusts." A strange, silent ache threaded through Elias' chest. The girl's bruised face flickered in his memory, the defiance in her eyes, the way she had tried not to shake even when fear gripped her small frame. She reminded him of something he couldn't name, something fragile he'd once sworn to protect in the world. "She's still in town?" he asked. "Yes, but she won't be for long." Elias understood then that this wasn't only about retaliation or leverage. This was about a system of cruelty that fed on the powerless, about a girl who had survived horrors she should never have known, about a boy who had witnessed his father rise like a shield and didn't yet understand the cost of such choices. Elias straightened, the quiet resolve of a soldier settling into his expression. "What's the plan?" The Admiral's relief was subtle but real. "We relocate your son first, somewhere secure. My men can have him protected within the hour." But Elias shook his head. "He doesn't leave me." The Admiral studied him for a long moment. "Then we protect him together." The two men, one shaped by orders, one shaped by instinct, stood in the soft light of dawn, bound not by ranks or medals, but by the unspoken oath that some battles must be fought not for nations, but for children, for the vulnerable, for the ones the world forgets. Elias looked toward his son's room. The sunlight reached just far enough to graze the cracked doorframe, a gentle reminder of everything he stood to lose. "They came to scare me," Elias said calmly. "Tomorrow they'll come to take something." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Then tonight we strike first." Outside, the last traces of the sedan disappeared beyond the tree line, carrying with it the promise of a coming storm. But inside that small, quiet home, a different truth took root, clear, steady and unyielding. A father does not run. A protector does not hide. And a man who has taken down 3 predators to save 1 girl will not hesitate to face whatever darkness comes next. Not when his child sleeps in the next room, not when a stranger's life hangs in the balance, not when his past is calling him back for one final war, because Elias Cain had already chosen which world he belonged to, and now he would make them regret ever stepping into it.